Imagine sending your 14-year-old child to school knowing that they may not make it home alive. Picture watching your teenager walk through a screaming mob of adults, hurling death threats, spit, and racial slurs, all for the simple reason of trying to get an education. This isn't a nightmare scenario. This was September the 4th, 1957, and it happened to 9 brave children whose names should be carved into every American's heart. Before I tell you about these most courageous teenagers in American history and the shocking truth about how integration really worked that they're not teaching your children in school, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We're building a community of parents and grandparents who refuse to let these heroes be forgotten. You know what broke my heart when I was researching this story? I realized that most kids today don't even know the names of the Little Rock Nine. They can tell you about TikTok stars and video game characters, but they can't tell you about Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, and Minnie Jean Brown. When I look at my own grandchildren, I wondered, how can they understand the courage it takes to stand up for what's right if they don't know these 9 teenagers who literally walked through hell to change America? And that's why I'm here with you today. And that's why this story matters now more than ever before. This is the story of the Little Rock Nine, the brave Black students who integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas on September the 4th, 1957. Their courage and persistence not only forced the United States to reckon with its commitment to equality under the law, but also shed a light on how integration was implemented in practice. But here's what they don't want you to know, and what your children and grandchildren need to understand about how this really worked. In 1954, the United States Supreme Court issued its landmark ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. The court declared that the doctrine of separate but equal established in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 was unconstitutional because separate facilities were inherently unequal. The justices unanimously ruled that public schools across the nation had to desegregate with all deliberate speed. But here's the part they glossed over in the textbooks. The ruling did not mean instant change. Across the South, white resistance was fierce and often violent. Many states and school districts stalled, created loopholes, or often defied federal law. Arkansas was no different. Governor Orville Faubus, like many Southern politicians of his day, knew that his political career depended upon defending segregation. Although the Little Rock School Board initially developed a plan to gradually integrate school, Faubus's resistance escalated into a national crisis. At the center of this storm stood 9 courageous Black students: Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, Minnie Jean Brown, Belva Patillo, Gloria Ray, Terrence Roberts, Jefferson Thomas, Carlotta Walls, and Thelma Mothershed. These students became known as the Little Rock Nine. On September the 4th, 1957, the Little Rock Nine attempted to enter Central High School for the first time. Instead of being welcomed into the classroom, they were greeted by angry white mobs and the National Guard, whom Governor Faubus had ordered to block their entry. Picture this scene. Elizabeth Eckford, just 15 years old, walking alone through a crowd of adults screaming for her blood. The iconic image of her lonely walk through the jarring crowd has become one of the most powerful symbols of the civil rights era. But imagine if that was your daughter, your granddaughter. For weeks, these children were turned away, subject to violence, and threatened with death. Finally, President Dwight D. Eisenhower intervened. Recognizing that the eyes of the world was upon Little Rock, Eisenhower ordered the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army to escort the students into the school. For the rest of that year, federal soldiers stood guard in the hallways and outside the classroom of Central High School. Inside the classroom, the Little Rock Nine endured daily harassment. They were spat on, shoved, called racial slurs, isolated by their peers. Teachers often looked in the other direction. Administrators did very little to protect them. Still, they persevered. And in 1958, Ernest Green became the first black student to graduate from Central High School. His graduation was attended by none other than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who called it a milestone in the struggle for civil rights. But here's what's really going to shock you about how integration actually worked. And this is the part they definitely are not teaching our children in school. While the bravery of the Little Rock Nine is undeniable, their experience also reveals a critical truth about how integration unfolded in practice. The burden of integration fell almost entirely on the shoulders of black students. Across the South, busing plans were designed to transport black children from their neighborhoods into white schools. Rarely, if ever, were white children required to attend black schools. Let me give you a real example that will make your blood boil. The Chula Attendance Center of Holmes County, Mississippi, was burned down twice after it was integrated with white students. The school was targeted after the black community began integrating white students as a part of the integration plan. Think about that. They literally burned down schools rather than to let white children learn alongside black children in a black community. This practice sent a clear message. White schools were considered superior, white schools were considered more desirable, and white schools were considered more legitimate than the black schools. White parents fought hard to keep their children from entering predominantly black institutions, while black families had little to no choice if they wanted their children to receive equal access to resources and opportunities. Integration thus became a one-way street where black students bore the weight of adjustment, hostility, and sacrifice. If this is opening your eyes to how the system really worked, make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell, because there's much more to this story that every family needs to understand. In Little Rock, this was evident, not only in the Nine's experience, but in the broader struggle over school choice. White families who opposed integration often withdrew their children from public schools altogether, choosing instead to establish private academies. This phenomenon, known as white flight, undermined the full potential of integration. Meanwhile, black students were expected to adapt to white environments without the reciprocal exchange that true integration requires. It is essential to recognize the human cost of the Little Rock Nine. These students were children, teenagers between the ages of 14 and 17 years old, who faced not just social rejection, but physical danger. They were targeted, not because of any academic performance or any unacceptable behavior, but because of the color of their skin. Their courage required them to endure what no child should have to endure: constant insults, physical threats, and psychological strain. Yet their families believed, and rightly so, that the sacrifices were worth it. Black schools had been systematically underfunded for generations. Textbooks were outdated, facilities were crumbling, and opportunities were limited. Integration offered the possibility of equality, not just in principle, but in tangible access to resources, teachers, and networks that white students had long taken for granted. Despite its challenges, integration brought undeniable benefits. First and foremost, it forced a nation to confront the hypocrisy of claiming to be a democracy while denying equal rights to millions of its citizens. The courage of the Little Rock Nine inspired countless others to push for change, from sit-ins at lunch counters to freedom rides all across the South. Educationally, integration offered Black students access to better funded schools, advanced curriculum, and broader opportunities. While the process was far from perfect, it helped break down some of the barriers that had confined Black Americans to second-class citizenship. Integration also challenged white students and teachers to confront their prejudices and recognize the shared humanity of their peers. Moreover, integration laid the groundwork for the diversity that defines the American classroom of today. Although schools remain imperfectly segregated due to housing patterns and continuous systemic inequalities, the principles that all children have the right to equal education remains a cornerstone of democracy. It was the bravery of the Little Rock Nine that ensured that this principle could no longer be ignored. When we remember the Little Rock Nine, we are not simply recalling a chapter of the past. We are acknowledging the sacrifices of the young people who changed American history. Their story reminds us that progress is never easy and that justice requires courage, sacrifice, and persistence. It also challenges us to think critically about how integration was carried out and to recognize that true equality requires reciprocity, not just one-sided adjustment. As we look to the future, we must ask ourselves whether we are living up to the promises of Brown versus the Board of Education. Are our schools truly equal today, or does systemic inequalities continue to have a greater impact on children of color, placing them at a disadvantage? These questions remain as urgent now as they did in 1957. In closing, the story of the Little Rock Nine is one of resilience, sacrifice, and triumph. It reveals both the challenges and the benefits to integration, while reminding us that progress only comes when ordinary people are willing to take extraordinary risks. By honoring their legacy, we recommit ourselves to building a society in which every child, regardless of race, background, or neighborhood, can receive an equal education and pursue their dreams. These 9 teenagers, Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, Minnie Jean Brown, Melba Patillo, Gloria Ray, Terrence Roberts, Jefferson Thomas, Carlotta Walls, and Thelma Mothershed. Their names should be as familiar to our children as every superhero. They are superheroes. They changed America forever. This is a history they're watering down in classrooms all across America. And this is the kind of courage they're not teaching our children about our history in school. But together, we could change that. If this story inspired you like it does me every time I tell it, I want you to do a couple of things. First, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you will never miss these stories that every family needs to know. Second, share this video with other parents, grandparents, and educators. Comment and tell me, did you know the names of these 9 heroes before today? Third, join our private Facebook group where we continue these conversations and share resources to help you teach the complete story of American history to the next generation. The link's in the description. And fourth, I want to recommend a book. It's called Warriors Don't Cry by Melba Patilla Beals. It will give you the complete story of the Little Rock Nine and the broader civil rights movement. Check out our full Black History Library in the description below. These are the books that will help you to tell these stories to your children and grandchildren with the depth and respect they deserve. Don't let them water down these heroes. Don't let the courage of the Little Rock Nine be forgotten or reduced to one paragraph in somebody's textbooks. Subscribe, share, and join a community of truth tellers. And I'll see you at the next video where we'll uncover another story of courage that they don't want you to know about. Take care.